Okay, we're back. I'm Alan Phillips, a winemaker here in Santa Barbara. Been in the industry for about 35 years. Been around the world and loved it. We're here to give you a little bit of insight into wine. Try to give you some ideas of how to be a better taster and learn more about what you're experiencing. One of the things we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about how to determine whether a wine has anything that's not quite right with it. And I don't like necessarily to use the word false, but that's what we're going to say. If there's something wrong with the wine, it helps to be able to identify what that is. And here's a perfect example. If you go into a restaurant and you order a bottle of wine, they pull the cork, you look at the cork, which doesn't necessarily give you a lot of information, but that's usually what they do. They present it to you. And then they pour you a taste. And the critical part of that is they're asking you to tell them if there's something wrong with it. So understanding what things can be wrong with the wine is really important in that environment. If there's nothing you can determine that's wrong with it, then you're going to buy it and drink it. So let's talk a little bit about that. What can happen to wine, and what can be some of the things that might be readily noticeable for you. And we're going to talk about 6 different things today. The first one we're going to talk about is vinegar. And we've all seen movies, we've all read articles, we've all looked at things, and people say they get a bottle of wine and oh my God, it's turned to vinegar. Well, that technically doesn't generally ever happen. If a wine has a high level of vinegar, and of course you'll be able to identify that smell. It smells like salad dressing, or it can also have a smell that's very similar to nail polish. So that you can identify it that way. If a wine has that character, it actually went into the bottle like that. So it's not a problem with the bottle going bad. It was a problem with the wine being bad before it went into the bottle. So don't accept that if somebody presents you with something like that. That's clearly a very bad fault with that particular bottle. Let's move on to a couple of others that can happen. One of the things that happens, you go out to buy a wine at your favorite retail store, and you buy 2 or 3 bottles and you put them in your trunk and you forget about them. You know, you come back in a week and you've left your car parked out in Palm Desert, you're going to have a problem with that wine. The problem with that wine is it's going to have gotten overheated. And what happens when it gets overheated is another process called oxidation. And what that does is it causes the wine to turn brown. It forces the cork out of the bottle, of course, because the wine expands. And the wine takes on a very dull, unbright character. So, heat is not wine's, beneficiary. You want to protect your wines from heat. The biggest thing is to make sure it doesn't go up or down in temperature, but too high a temperature can really damage a wine. So that character is basically going to come on. You're going to see it in the color of the wine. A red wine will turn sort of brickish, and white wine will turn brown. You can notice that right away. You almost don't even need to smell it or taste it, but the indications in the smell will be a very, very dull, very unlively wine. So that's another fault to keep an eye out for. The oxidation, which can take place in a number of different ways. That can be improperly stored wine. It can be wine that got warm. It can also sometimes be a wine that was bottled with a high level of oxygen in it. And oxygen also is a friend of wine, but in very small quantities, which is why we talk about aging wines for long periods of time. That very slow level of oxygen pickup in the wine is good, but a very quick level of oxygen pickup is very bad. And what happens, the characteristic that you can identify in an oxidized wine, in both reds and whites, is a character that might smell very much like sherry. If you've had sherry, you've cooked with sherry, you probably know what that is. It's very nutty. It's a very identifiable characteristic, and it's not something that you would smell in a light, bright, fresh, vibrant wine. So keep an eye out for that as well. One of the big things that gets talked about in wine circles these days is what's called corkiness. And corkiness has been a very significant problem in the industry And what that is, just to be brief and not too scientific, it's a chemical called TCA, and it's produced in the process of the cork being made and being washed with water and particular cleaning agents. It creates this chemical. And when that gets in contact with the wine, it is absorbed by the wine, and that particular compound in a level of parts per billion, if you can imagine what that is, that's like a grain of sand on a beach, it will taint the wine. And what that wine will smell like, and in some cases even taste like, will be a wet cardboard or a wet paper bag or a wet dog or even like horse leather. It's very strong, it's very potent, it's very pungent, and very unwine-like. So again, it's something that is reasonably quickly identifiable, but if you do identify that, most people in the wine business, retailers and restaurateurs, they know about this problem. It's a problem that we've had. It's why a lot of people are going to screw cap enclosures, because that doesn't happen with the screw cap, obviously. So we're not losing wine. It got as high as 5% of wine loss back in the 80s and 90s from corky bottles. So it's something to keep an eye out for. And if you get that character, don't have any hesitation to send that wine right back. One of the last things that you can come across in wine, it's not the last, but it's another important one, is a yeast that can ferment in the wine that is not a yeast that we introduce as winemakers. It's a yeast that gets in there by basically by infection, by bad sanitation, other processes. It's called Brettanomyces, and what it does is it creates, as it grows in the wine, it creates a very, very foul aroma, and it can be it can go all the way towards really unpleasant, rather stinky characters, and again, readily identifiable.
Like what? Like rotten eggs, or
Well,
what type of stinkiness?
It can go to kind of stinkiness, a little bit what I was describing previously with the corkiness. It can go to wet horses, wet dog, Band-Aid. It can be very, very unpleasant. Again, very noticeable because if present in even very, very minute quantities, you will pick it out. It's something that you won't miss. If you smell it once, you'll know it. The final thing we'll talk about is another thing that happens in wine, and we call it the rotten egg effect. And this is another aspect of what happens to wines before they're put into the bottle. And what happens is there's a chemical compound. I don't want to get too complicated on that, but it's called H2S sulfide, and it creates a rotten egg smell in the wine. And it happens because of a number of different things that happen in the wine cellar while the wine is being made. And if it's not corrected before it goes into the bottle, it can be very unpleasant and identifiable very easily as bad eggs. It can be removed from wine with aeration. That's usually how it is done in the cellar before the wine is bottled. If it does happen in the bottle, you can recover the bottle by aerating into a decanter, and it might need more than one decantation, but you might be able to pull that wine back from the precipice and see if it improves. But that shouldn't really be your responsibility. If a wine is presented to you with that flaw, again, I would just let whoever know and send it right back. So just a quick summary of what we talked about. These specific faults and things in wine that are unpleasant. The biggest one that you're probably going to come across is corkiness, and that can happen to any winemaker in any part of the world. I don't care whether it's Mouton Rothschild or Carlo Rossi. It's a problem across the industry. We're working on trying to solve the problem. There's a lot of industry things happening, but it doesn't really matter whether you're buying a $3 bottle of cork, wine with a cork in it, or a $100 bottle of wine. It can happen. The other things that we've discussed are problems that develop generally prior to the wine going into the bottle.
What were those things?
That would be Brettanomyces. That would be the problem with oxidation. That would be a problem with generally sanitation, where you're gonna get some of these characteristics like sulfide, the rotten egg smell I was explaining. Those things happen in the cellar before the wine is bottled. So if you're seeing that, often in wines that you're purchasing from particular places, you probably don't want to keep buying those wines. Let's get you finding another supplier and a better winemaker to get you things that you're not going to have those kinds of issues with. If I left anything out, if you have any questions, please just go down to our the bottom of our page here. You can reach me on the web and be glad to answer any questions. If you don't feel like you're confident in some of these things, we have the availability of actually a kit that you can buy, and it will identify these smells for you. So you can actually pick them up and give them a little sniff, and you can identify exactly what we've talked about. So don't feel free to contact me, and if that kit can help you, please take a look at it.